Alright guys, it's Chatterbox Reviews, coming to you guys with my review for the mini-series Masters of the Air. Alright, so this is the first show I'm reviewing here for 2024. I would have liked to do some more, reviews and that stuff. Obviously, some of the earlier episodes of this series, but I decided I'll just wait until it finishes. I had some other shows that are kind of coming up to an end here shortly. Been watching The Ones Who Live, of course, the Walking Dead spinoff, Constellation as well on Apple TV, The Regime. So those are just a few shows that I've been checking out that I plan to review as well when they kind of finish up here very soon as well. So yeah, would have liked to do episode-to-episode reviews here of this one, but I thought, at the point that I, was kind of, had the time to do it, it was like, okay, I'll just wait till it ends. So anyways, here we are. Masters of the Air just ended a couple days ago from when I'm recording this, so maybe three days ago from when this is up. Anyway, so love to hear your guys' thoughts on this mini-series. Of course, this is the third installment in these kind of World War II mini-series from Spielberg and Hanks, Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks, with Band of Brothers and The Pacific coming before it. I think The Pacific was like over 10 years ago, and Band of Brothers is over 20 years ago. Absolutely insane, right? So anyways, love to hear your guys' thoughts on this one. And of course, if you watch Band of Brothers in the Pacific, you really enjoy those like I do. Love to hear your guys' thoughts. And I'll talk as well in this video, especially of how this one compares to those two. And we'll kind of draw some threads in there. And if you enjoy this review, please leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel as well. We'd really appreciate that. So without any further ado, let's get into kind of talking about this miniseries just as a whole. So obviously, if you haven't seen the whole thing, spoilers ahead. I'll be talking about every episode, every detail, from the show. So yeah, just forewarned there. But yeah, so like I said off the top, this is produced by Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks, and developed by John Orloff, which was an interesting name going into this because he was the writer of Day of Days and Why We Fight. So that's episode 2 and episode 9 of Band of Brothers, which I think are considered the two best episodes. Maybe some people really like Kurahi, right? The first episode of Band of Brothers, really establishing things and that really beginning that kind of brotherhood. Right, but to me, those are the two best episodes of Band of Brothers, and he wrote those two episodes. So I was really intrigued, right, to see, okay, the guy who wrote those episodes is doing this series, and he essentially, I didn't know this going in, but he essentially wrote every single episode here of this series by himself. He had some co-writers on a couple episodes here, but, and of course, John Chabon, I think, from Breaking Bad, of course. Really great to see him, and I think he kind of tried to maybe create this on his own prior to John Orloff taking over, or they did it together at the beginning, but anyways, he kind of fell off. So it was just John Orloff, and he is the one who, developed this and kind of brought it all the way and wrote, like I said, the majority, basically all of these episodes by himself. So this series obviously is a follow-up then to Band of Brothers and The Pacific, which Spielberg and Hanks both produced, like I said, 10 and 20 years ago, respectively. And this one focuses on the action of the 100th Bomb Group during the Second World War. So obviously, Masters of the Air, we're focusing on the Air Force, whereas Band of Brothers was, on the Army, right, the ground. And then The Pacific was obviously about the Pacific Theater and that kind of thing. So yeah, a little bit of a different take here looking at the Air Force, which we haven't, I don't believe we've done at all actually in either of those first two miniseries. I don't, maybe just small glimpses of the Air Force. Oh yeah, I guess of Day of Days, right, where, in Band of Brothers where they drop down from the plane. So I guess, yeah, we did get, a little bit of a glimpse. But this is a real focus on the Air Force here in this one. So in terms of the cast here, let's talk a little bit about that. So Austin Butler is probably the biggest name. And, 2 or 3 years ago when this series was, we first heard that it was going to come out, it was supposed to come out for about 3 years, right? at that point, I'm not sure that Austin Butler definitely was not as big of a name because Elvis hadn't come out yet, right? And he hadn't been nominated for the Oscar and damn near almost won the Oscar for it. So he really rose, and they probably filmed this like right around the time that Elvis was coming out or, prior to. And so now to see him after Elvis being in this show, it's like, wow, they got a huge name, right, to play the lead here. But at the time, maybe not, maybe not as big. But anyways, I thought he did such a great job in this miniseries. He was great. He was still doing like the Elvis voice, which was interesting. So again, maybe that really does speak to the fact that this was filmed around the same time and he was still kind of in that vocal range. But, he obviously does have a deep voice just naturally, but it was kind of funny seeing that. And yeah, I thought he was really good. Not a whole lot of range, and I don't think that was necessarily requirement here for this series specifically, the Pacific, a little bit of a different story there. And so I thought he was good in that. And Callum Turner as well. I swore I did see him in some other stuff before this, and maybe I have. I thought he was really great. Maybe better than Austin Butler actually. Again, had a little bit more opportunity to show that range, and I thought he was great. Anthony Boyle, real standout, right? Doing the narration here, playing Harry Crosby, right? I thought he was really great. Maybe the best, actually, right? I mean, he was a real standout just throughout the series, kind of carrying us, right? Being that narrator, bringing us along. And he had some really kind of emotional moments as well towards the end of the series. So yeah, I thought he was just really great. And him losing Bubbles as well, that kind of, episode there, I thought he was really great. And then Barry Keoghan. I mean, he was only in, right, of course, spoilers, but he was only in, the first 3 episodes, basically, right? And I can't remember how much he had in the first episode. I don't think that much. So it was really episode 2 and 3 where he was like, really our third main character next to Clevens and Egan, right, with Austin Butler and Callum Turner. And boy, was he so good. I mean, the accent, maybe, it kind of threw some people off. I can definitely see that. But just such a great performance here. And you really could see, like, when you get a guy like Barry Keoghan, who's, pretty much at that, like, Oscar level, right? He's been in some films now. He's really shown, of course, Banshees of Inisherin a couple years ago. He was really great in. He's just so great as that kind of supporting kind of character actor at this point. And so when you get a guy like that, you just kind of see the levels a little different, right, than Callum Turner and Anthony Boyle. And I know Austin Butler was nominated for Elvis, but I just think he's a little bit of a step ahead of him. And he's just so great. And I'll talk about episode 3 where he, his death and his kind of focus in that episode. Just amazing stuff. So, yeah. Nate Mann as Rosie was really great. I think he's kind of more of a newcomer. Thought he was really great. Stephen Campbell Moore, I've seen him in a couple things too. And he was just kind of in and out throughout the series. And then James Murray, I thought was really quite good as well. The mustache was definitely a key kind of identifier for him. And I thought he was good. And I don't even remember his character's name, to be honest with you. But I do know he was, the guy that was kind of, when they had those missions in the kind of briefing room, he was the one given those for kind of the earlier episodes, I want to say. And, of course, many others, right? Huge ensemble cast for this one. And kind of similar to Band of Brothers, though not quite to the same extent. But some episodes we have, one character or one, actor who has a big presence, and then they're not really seen again. Or maybe they're just sprinkled in a couple other episodes. Or, of course, their character just dies, right? Like the real, events, and they just die and we don't see them again. So, yeah, lots of that stuff, right, sprinkled throughout this series as well. But in terms of the main players, I thought, the ones that I mentioned there definitely covered that. So at the end of the day, it's the third best of these miniseries. I said I would, kind of talk about how it compares to the other ones and all that stuff. And yeah, I mean, it's the third best. It's not quite as good as the Pacific, and to me, it's not really close to Band of Brothers. Band of Brothers is easily top 10 for me in like best TV shows of all time. I know it's a mini series, so it's a little harder to compare, but it's there for me. I mean, it's just such an amazing series. And even now, like, we're more than 20 years out from when it came out, and some of the visuals, and I'll talk a little bit about that with this series too, it's like some of those visuals, especially from Day of Days when they're jumping out of the plane, I mean, those, like, they just stand up. Even today, with all the effects and all this stuff, I think it actually looks better than what some of these shots looked in this series. So, I can't say enough about Band of Brothers. Obviously, love the miniseries. So it would have been hard, right, for this one to compare or, you know, get to that level. So it was pretty much what I expected. I went in thinking that this would probably be the third best miniseries of these bunch, and it was, right? So pretty much what I expected. Like I said, impossible to top Band of Brothers, and it didn't quite live up to the Pacific, right? Now, it's a little hard. I find it a little difficult to even compare Band of Brothers and the Pacific because they're just going for such a different approach, right? And the same with the Pacific and this one. It's just such a very different approach. That miniseries was definitely more focused on kind of the, you know, negative side of war, right? And the effects, the psychological effects on the men that are fighting in. Especially, it really lended itself well to the Pacific arena, right? Where war was very different than the Western Front, right? That as it is in Masters of the Air and Band of Brothers. Just a completely different experience for the men there. And so it's hard to compare, right, this show to that show when they're taking completely different approaches. However, I think the approach here is very similar, actually, to Band of Brothers. So comparing them like that, yeah, obviously I think Band of Brothers is head and shoulders above this miniseries. And would I have liked to see more, you know, an approach, I guess, similar to the Pacific? Maybe, but like I said, I'm okay with them kind of trying to replicate Band of Brothers because, again, the Pacific arena was just a different experience. And so to keep that kind of contained within the Pacific and that approach, I think that's perfectly fine at the end of the day. But yeah, so that's just kind of where I see it. It's the third best of all these miniseries. I don't know that a lot of people would be surprised by that statement either, right? Now, having said that it's the third best, that doesn't mean it's bad, right? Obviously, like I've said, Band of Brothers is all time. The Pacific, to me, you know, there's moments of the Pacific where I just kind of think, it's not quite that good, right? There's a couple episodes in there, like, I remember specifically the one episode, I haven't watched it in a few years, but the one episode where it's just like they're in Australia or something on kind of like a weekend away, I really didn't like that episode. But anyways, for, you know, most of the Pacific to me is a really, you know, high bar, really great stuff. And so obviously it's not bad saying it's the third best miniseries, but it's just not at that level, if that's what you were expecting for some reason, right? I wasn't, maybe some people were, but that's what it is. So now, like I said, the approach is similar to Band of Brothers in that kind of brotherhood, that kind of camaraderie among the men, building this kind of family, this connection between these guys. And so when you're going for an approach like that Band of Brothers did so well. I mean, better than any movie and that stuff too, because you just had more episodes. You had more time with these men and with these characters. And because of that, this brotherhood, this connection felt so earned and so real. And, you know, it just really worked well. But in this miniseries, you had almost the same amount of episodes. You had 9 episodes compared to the 10, but it just didn't feel the same. Like, it just lacked something that Band of Brothers had. And I think it's also the nature, though, of this show, right? It's the nature of the 100th, right? Because, you know, let's be real, right? The real story, the truth is that, you know, the mortality rate was insanely high for this, you know, division, right? For the 100th, it's called the Bloody 100th, and they kind of emphasize that in the series, right? That not a lot of guys stuck around, right? They came in, they flew a few missions or even just one mission, and they didn't return, right? Or, you know, obviously they could have been captured, but a lot of them died, right? And so that's just kind of the nature of the series and the story that they're telling here is that, yeah, there's not as much of a brotherhood or a family developed here because, you know, and they say it in the series, like repeatedly, right? Crosby, our narrator, says it. It's like, it's hard to build connections or get attached to anybody because, you know, most of them will just be gone on the next mission and we won't see them again. And so, yeah, that's completely fair because that is the nature of what it is. That's the true story that they're telling. So, yeah, obviously the Brotherhood is not going to be quite the same. But I still, having said all that, I still think it could have been better. Some of these characters are just not as developed, not as kind of lived in to me as they were in Band of Brothers. Though, of course, Egan and Clevens was a great duo, and I think the best duo. Like I can't remember a duo quite like that in Band of Brothers. Again, that was more of kind of a community or a group of men. This one is more of just a duo of those two. And outside of those two, like obviously Biddick in the first few episodes, Barry Keoghan's character is great. He kind of blends in well, but outside of the duo, I didn't find a lot of characters that I recognized, that I really cared about. They just didn't do as good of a job as they did in Band of Brothers with that. You know, and again, yeah, that's the nature of the 100th, the bloody 100th. You know, that a lot of guys weren't around, right, very long, and they didn't develop those connections. But I don't know. I didn't quite get the same sort of connection and feeling to these characters and this attachment. Because, you know, honestly, like you think about it, like Rosie only came in the later episodes, but he was great, you know, in that time. Egan, Clevens, and Crosby, right? Like that's really it in terms of, you know, and obviously Biddick, but he's only around for the first couple episodes. And so those are really the only characters that, like, you remember the name of, you recognize immediately when they come on screen, you have some emotional connection to. And Band of Brothers, man, like, there's at least 10 guys, right? 10 characters that you feel that to by the end of the series. And so, again, not as many stuck around, but I just feel like they could have done a little bit better with that. And then that's the next thing I wanted to say is that the pacing of this series just felt a little off to me. And the big thing with that, and I saw some people say this as well when I was looking online a little bit, and it really does feel like they jumped into the story too quickly. And that's something that I said earlier. A lot of people love the episode Currahee in Band of Brothers, the first episode there, because it was so important in developing that connection very early on to these men, you know, them training together, them kind of being brought up together before they actually go to fight, right? So it develops that connection. And in this one, we just didn't really have that. It really, I think it starts right with them, you know, Buck and Bucky, right? Egan and Clevens, you know, dancing. And then it very quickly transitions to them at the Air Force Base, I believe. It's been like 2 months since I've seen the episode, but I think that's what happened, right? So it's kind of just really jumped a little too quickly into things, I feel like, where we could have had an episode where they're maybe at pilot school or they're training together, and we get a bit of that more connection. And again, maybe that's just not really how it was for the 100th, and they're trying to stay true to the facts, the true story. But yeah, I just feel like they went in a little too quickly, and that definitely hurt this kind of connection that I'm talking about. So I think that could have been done better. The middle episodes, and talking about the pacing here, the middle episodes just lacked some substance to me at times. Like episode, I want to say like 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7. Like just those middle episodes to me, just like not a lot of stuff happened in them. It just felt like we were kind of, and again, where you had episodes in the Pacific where, yeah, there's not a lot of action and fighting, but it was because they were trying to emphasize the psychological effects and other things that were going on. And in this one, they do that a little bit, but it just felt like we had too much downtime in some of these episodes where it's like, yeah, they were sent for this R&R little, you know, mini vacation or whatever, but it just felt like we spent a lot of time on that in the episode, and only little elements of it were kind of teasing the fact that some of these men were going through the psychological effects of war, you know, with the one, you know, boy man, you know, young man crying in the one scene where Rosie kind of sees him in the garden there. And so there was some stuff, but just not enough in those episodes to me. And I feel like there could have actually been a 10th episode. Having said that, like, it's a weird thing to say, but or at least just something after where the series actually ended in episode 9. I would have liked to actually see maybe them back at home. It's kind of like the Pacific. Like, what a just heart-wrenching scene. I believe it's Sledge, right? Sledge comes back at the end of the Pacific, and he comes home, and just, I remember, like, it's been a few years since I've seen it, but just the visual of him, I think he's, like, on the front lawn of his house and just, like, in tears because he can't, grapple with this life outside of war, being home. I would have liked to see maybe some elements of that because they tease that a little bit, but we don't really get to see it. We just kind of end with them, on the planes going home in this one. So kind of an odd critique, right? I'm saying, okay, the middle episodes were lacking substance, but I want more episodes. But I don't, so maybe just keep it at 9 episodes, but kind of maybe cut some of that fluff in the middle and give us a little bit more of, an ending for some of these characters after that finale, after they head home to the States, right, stateside. So that's just me. I just felt like the pacing was a little uneven at times, for sure, in this one. Okay, so let's talk about the really the highs, right, of this series, episode 3. I mean, it's the epitome to me. I thought this episode was amazing. Just amazing stuff. It perfectly captured the environment that these men were being thrust into during the earlier stages of the war, right? When they didn't have air superiority, as we saw at the end of the series. Like, what a stark contrast. And they did a really great job of showing that. I'll give them that. Where the beginning of this series, it was like basically suicide. Right? And that's what episode 3 shows so well. And by the end of the series, it's like they were like they felt pretty safe up there, right? Because they had overwhelming air superiority. But at this point in episode 3, they do not. And it like I said, is almost like suicide, just going up there. And they talk about it in the first couple episodes, right, where the Americans decide to do, I believe it's daytime, right, daytime raids, where the English are only attacking at night because it's harder for them to be shot down and for the Germans to track them. Makes sense, you would think, right? But no, they're flying these daytime raids, and it is so dangerous. It's just a miracle almost that they come back alive, and they're set up in these tin cans that are somehow flying in the air, and just debris, explosions, bullets. Like, it's just insane what they went through at this stage of the war, and it just had this cinematic feel, this claustrophobia, right? This kind of feeling of being trapped in this tin can, literally in the case of, the one young man gets kind of trapped in I'm forgetting what it's called, but it's kind of that glass little ball right at the bottom of the plane. But yeah, just the feeling of that being trapped in that tin can, and you can't really do anything. You have gunners on the plane on board, but they tried their best, and even in the show, like, it really didn't, they weren't that effective. They tried their best, but even those guns are not that effective at kind of defending themselves. And so they were just up there, and that's what they did. They went up there, and just such bravery, right, on display for these men to do that. And go up there. And obviously, as we see towards the end of the series, it really did make an impact. It did help establish that air superiority by the end of the war, which really helped, especially on D-Day, as we see in the series. And obviously that's very true to what happened, right? Very important for D-Day to kind of clear the way for the landing, right, on the beach there. So, I just thought episode 3 was really great. Again, some elongated sequences here. Cary Fukunaga, right, directing this, obviously, some really great stuff that he's done over the years. And, just some really great sequences here in the plane. Again, that claustrophobia, being kind of attached or being kind of in that plane with these characters. I thought he did such a great job in capturing that. And of course, we have to talk about Biddick's death in episode 3. This was so impactful, so effective, the way that they did this, because it really was shocking, right? Or at least, I didn't know, right? I didn't know the true story, right, of what happened to Biddick. So I was shocked, watching the show. But obviously, if you looked into it, you would know. But having this death happen in episode 3, they did this so perfectly because I think it's the previous episode, or is it even earlier in episode 3? No, I think it's episode 2, where he has this, landing, basically this crash landing, and he's able to, pull off this miracle and land kind of in this field, right, where they take the plane down instead of having to bail, right, and having to go, I believe it's into enemy territory, right, and probably being captured. And so he pulls off this miracle of landing. He lands in the field, and everyone survives, and it's like this huge thing. So then they do this perfectly, because then in episode 3 we get a parallel of it happening again. He tries to take the plane. I think most of the crew bail first, right, but he says, no, I'm going to take it down. Right, I'm going to do basically the same thing again. I'm going to go into this field. We're going to crash land. But I did it before. I'm going to pull it off. And to the very last second, you think that he's going to do it again. You think that he's going to pull off this miracle because he's done it before. And obviously, as well, having Barry Keoghan acting, have this character playing this role, you kind of think he's going to stick around for quite a while, right? Like, you think he's going to be a main character in the series for the duration of the series. And so I think they just did this so perfectly, just everything going into it, where, again, the final seconds before he dies, you think, oh, he's going to pull this off. And then suddenly it's like, no. And I think he says, oh, God, or something like that right before we get that line. And yeah, and then he just crashes right into the trees. He just, the plane is going too fast, and he just can't, pull off the landing. Right, and it's almost heroic too. I think I'm trying to remember now, because it's been a couple months since I've seen it, but it is him trying to I guess trying to get help for his friend. Right, he's trying to, because his friend is not able to bail because he's been injured. Right, and so he's trying to crash land and so that they can get help for him and get him out of the plane. But in reality, his friend was probably lost and was probably going to die. Very shortly, after they landed. But it is kind of this act of heroism for him. And again, it's that fact that he pulled it off just before. And so why couldn't he just do it again? Anyway, so I just thought that was so perfect. And it really set the stakes high, even though, really no major character actually dies in the rest of the series. Major characters. But it really did set the stakes because, again, Barry Keoghan's in the role. You think he's going to last a long time. And so to be able to, just 3 episodes in, show us, okay, no, this huge, character for the show so far, and this big actor that we have playing him, it doesn't matter, right? Like, he can die at any time. Any of these characters can die, and that's the nature of what these men are doing, and what they actually did, at the time. So really great stuff. I really can't, say enough good things about how they pulled that off, because again, you could have really screwed that up with killing off that character, because he's such a great character too. In the first couple episodes, again, Barry Keoghan is a great performance, but the way he went out was just perfect, was just really perfect. So yeah, really like that. And so obviously, all that being said, episode 3 is definitely my best episode of this one. Episode 9 would probably be up there too. Really like the finale with everything that happened. Some great directing by Timmy Van Patten there. To me, the best director on TV for the last probably going on 20 years, right? Starting with The Sopranos that he did. But anyway, so really great, moments there for sure in that one. So in terms of just appreciating this series, I do really want to do that. I've said some negative things about it. Yeah, it doesn't compare to Band of Brothers or The Pacific, but few TV projects have or will compare to this kind of level, right? And what I mean by that is just all the technical stuff, right? Like the production design, the effects, even though at some points I thought they weren't as good as they could have been, but for largely, right, overall, I thought the effects were great. The direction here, really great. Cinematography, the score, by the way, by Blake Neely, I believe is his name, I thought was maybe the best score for any of these miniseries. So that is the one kind of crowding thing that I might give this one, top prize for. But just everything, right, is so impressive. All the technical elements here that go into this. And this level of technical achievement is only really seen in movies these days, right? I mean, it's just kind of the nature of it, right? Obviously, you have a way higher budgets for movies, and so this is usually what you see in movies. And so to have this on TV, it's just so impressive, and I just want to appreciate that. Just this fact alone, makes this series special. Even though, yeah, maybe it didn't live up to some people's expectations. Maybe it's obvious, it's not as good as Band of Brothers, but it's still special because, well, obviously it's covering a very important, event and really honoring these men that were really brave and heroic and did these acts, of course. But, aside from that, it's also really special just in the fact that it's just a really, it's like a masterpiece, really, to watch, technically speaking. It's just really impressive. And like I said, few TV projects have reached this level. I mean, you want to talk about Game of Thrones, obviously, right? Reached that level in terms of this kind of big technical achievement. Obviously, Band of Brothers, The Pacific, I would put up there too. There's a few that I'm missing, right? Some big miniseries in there too, but yeah, it's not as good. But some of these technical elements are just so impressive, man. That you have to really appreciate it. Anyways, you really have to be, thankful, to have something like this on TV. And obviously this was supposed to be on HBO originally. So, it's understandable that HBO passed because, obviously this isn't quite on the level of Band of Brothers to me. But Apple TV, comes in and it goes on there, and they probably gave them a higher budget than what HBO was going to do, even though that would have been pretty high. So you can see it, man. You can see the money put into this, and I think they really did a good job with that budget and really pulled off something spectacular here to me in terms of the technical stuff. So just want to say that I do really appreciate the show, and I think it is special in that way. So overall, kind of concluding things then, it is a good companion piece, right, to Band of Brothers and The Pacific, which to me, it does reach similar heights to those series, in certain spots, right? Like I said, episode 3, I really like the finale. Even just in some episodes here, there's some really great sequences in that. But just as a whole, right, it falls kind of well short, I would say, while compared to those other series, to me. And, again, I'm not surprised, though. This isn't shocking to me that it's the third best, that it doesn't compare to Band of Brothers. It's just not that surprising to me. It's kind of what I thought it was going to be. But, again, some really great heights that maybe I actually didn't expect, like episode 3 and like some of these moments. So, again, still definitely worth watching. Not a bad series at all, but just as a whole, it's just not quite as good as those other ones. And again, it's nice to have as well as kind of a companion piece. I like that they're kind of calling it that because it really is. Like, this doesn't, and this is an important part, a point I should have made earlier. This doesn't really matter, the quality of this series. It doesn't tarnish what Band of Brothers did so well. It doesn't tarnish what The Pacific did so well. It really does serve as this companion. So in that way, I think this is great too. It's not like a Band of Brothers sequel or a Pacific sequel. It's very much standalone on its own. And so, yeah, it doesn't compare to those two, but it's still a nice thing to have to be able to watch in the future if you want to watch all 3 back to back or something like that, right? So yeah, overall, definitely worth checking out at the end of the day. So that'll just about do it then for all my thoughts on Masters of the Air, the miniseries here on Apple TV Plus. And I have to say, Apple TV Plus has quite a few shows here in the first half of the year that I'm watching, which is kind of weird for me. I haven't watched a lot of Apple stuff in the past. But anyways, getting into that. So love to hear your guys' thoughts on this mini-series, of course. Like I said off the top, how does it compare to the other series to you? Do you agree with me in saying, that it's the third best out of all these ones that they've done so far? Any and all your thoughts on that? Love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments below. But anyways, that'll just about do it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you then in my next review.